Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about this new moon that's coming up, and more so, I believe right now, we want to talk about the background of events in the world, especially in the United States. And also, we want to talk about what's happening for individuals in the midst of transformation, really, which is still the keynote of all these new moons that we've been looking at. And the new moons are significant charts. These charts, for the time when the sun and moon begin their 30-day cycle, really signal the quality of the time of the month that they precede. So this would be the month beginning with February 11th, which is the new moon, which is, as of this recording time, it will be tomorrow. I'm recording this on Wednesday the 10th. And, we're going to see what happens in the current events this week with the impeachment trial that's going on in the Senate, which I think is worth talking about. So let's take a look at the chart before we get too far afield. And I will do that with this. And there we go. So what we're looking at here is the chart of the new moon itself. I've done it for San Francisco, which means that we have the ascendant for San Francisco showing up as this little design right here. If we did it for Washington, D.C., it would be a different ascendant. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Then also, we are going to look at this new moon, which is, so many planets in Aquarius. It's really quite remarkable. This is the case all month long. Let's not get confused and think that this is just in the configuration of the new moon, because all these planets really start out the month. Saturn and Jupiter have now moved beyond Capricorn and they're in Aquarius. And then, of course, at the timing of just before the month began, of the January 28th full moon, that was when Jupiter was at 9 degrees of Aquarius, and so was the full moon. So that was really emphasizing, to some extent, a positive take on things. We still have Saturn, and we still have Saturn-Uranus. And Saturn-Uranus, in that square between Aquarius and Taurus, is getting very intense right now, coming to its perfection. 6.5 degrees of Aquarius versus 7 degrees in Taurus of the Uranus. And Saturn-Uranus is a very interesting configuration, which will be really the configuration for the year, the 2021 year. It goes in and out of exactitude from July 4th, ending in July 4th. From mid-May until July 4th will be another time when it's within 2 degrees. And it also colors this entire time. You can say right up till the end of the year, maybe even till the beginning of 2023, there will be some significant factor of, what is Saturn-Uranus? So Saturn is conservative, Uranus is progressive. So in a very simplistic sense, we have a divide between, and the square indicates the conflict, a divide between the extreme conservative viewpoint, represented by some segments of the population, of course, and the extreme progressive viewpoint represented by others. And we have the past administration, which was a conservative approach, trying to maintain the status quo. We could even say trying to maintain the status quo ante, before there was so much diversity in the population, we could say. And then seeing now the conflict with the progressive ideas represented by Uranus, which just wants to do new things, move forward. And of course you do need both. You need that dose of caution. You need that forward-looking idea, because life is change. Life is nothing but change. Dylan expressed it very well when he said, in the line, I forget the song, he said, everybody not busy being born is busy dying. And, basically you're going one way or the other. You're doing something. So you have to try to do the thing that makes the most sense for you personally in your life. And sussing out what that is a great task. It's really the great task we have before us. So just to point out a few factors in this new moon. One thing is, of course, Mercury's retrograde. It will be retrograde all month. The 20th, it turns to direct motion, but it's still way behind where it started. And until it recovers that ground, it started retrograding at the 26 degree mark. of Aquarius. It goes all the way back to 11 before it turns around on the 20th and moves forward again. And it won't be until March 9th that it gets past that place that it started. And we say that that time when it's making up the lost zodiacal ground, called its retrograde shadow, is another time when it's still kind of wobbly and getting straightened out. The actual moment of the station to direct motion on the 20th is not like, oh, everything's back to normal with Mercury. It's more one of the peak moments of the retrograde cycle because it's standing dead still in the sky at that time of the station, which is the 20th of February. So we do have all that introspection involved, and it just puts a different cast on things where we're really kind of reviewing, revising. They say everything with RE, right? So we are reviewing, revising, readjusting, possibly doing course corrections, or at least thinking about what we want to do differently. And in the general scheme of the signs, this is the future orientation, namely Aquarius, ruled by Uranus. So now we do have Saturn in the sign of Uranus's rulership at the same time as Uranus is in Taurus, which is an earth sign, which is much closer in its flavor to Saturn, which is an earth sign energy planet. So this is quite interesting times with the Saturn-Uranus. And like I say, the simplistic idea of Saturn-Uranus and collision is just the division between the right-wing extremism and left-wing extremism, perhaps. Or you could say that neither one dominates, but rather they have a mix and match where they kind of struggle with each other to get, and we see the divide right now in the country. For individuals, it's also similar because we all have within us both the enjoyment of our personal rut that we're in, because it's comfortable, because it's safe. It's like old slippers, you know where your feet feel comfortable, but they are old slippers that may be falling apart. So the timing of new things is part of this whole Saturn-Uranus concept, which is really invading everybody's attention, especially if you have something in the early degrees of the fixed signs, because they are going to be squared or opposed by this Saturn-Uranus combination. So the question is, do I go forward rapidly without throwing caution to the wind, so to speak, or do I stay the course, stick to it, am I too fearful to go forward gracefully? And, am I ready to quit that job and go for it as a entrepreneur? Or maybe you have to do a mix of both things. Typically you have to do a mix to really go forward with a new phase. You have to kind of ease into it. You have to maybe keep your day job or reduce the hours of your day job. That's just using that as one example or as a metaphor for what we do in our lives, how we make these decisions, how we decide whether to go or stay, how to go forward, how to make it work with the existing situation, those kind of questions. And also, don't forget, emphasized by this strong position of Pluto. We've had it all this time. This new moon is 23 degrees, Pluto's at 25. That's a little bit of a separation, only being a semi-sextile as well. So it's not that strong, except we still have this T-square with these new planets. So we have Eris at 23 degrees of Aries, squaring the Pluto position. We have opposite of this Eris and Aries, we have Haumea at the tail end of Libra, moving now backwards, retrograde motion. And they are quite a few degrees apart here, 4 or 5. But the point being, they're moving toward each other. And by the summer, they will be fully opposite each other still. And meanwhile, Pluto turns retrograde in the spring. So we will have the same T-square active and even more exact, more active over the summer. And to me, that gives us a little bit of a predictive feel for what's happening, what's coming up. In other words, are we free of the pandemic? Well, everybody knows, of course, we're not. And so the Saturn in Capricorn, which is the transformation of society, which has been greatly enhanced in this past year with having also the Pluto in Capricorn is what I was trying to say. Having Saturn along with it, so we had Saturn-Pluto, was a much more intense timing of this societal transformation that we're still in the midst of. But just having Capricorn, prominent Capricorn, by this T-square, by the new moons being at very close degree to pretty much the Pluto degree. I'll get my planet straight. Anyway, Pluto represents transformation. And Capricorn especially, because it is the transformation of society that we're seeing. We're going to come out of this pandemic in a much different place than we started, right? I think everybody recognizes that. And how do we do it in our individual lives as well? Are we willing to make the changes? It's never really fun to get out of that comfortable rut, but sometimes we have to, and that is the way life moves. It moves ahead. And we are faced with, what parts of our life do we have to surrender and let go of as dysfunctional, not fully serving ourselves? That where can we, it's not exactly improve and become perfect and magnificent, but where can we become more authentic? Where can we really inhabit our graceful, true selves that correspond to natural, we say natural law, we say right relationship, right action. And that's where Haumea comes in, because not only representing strong outer planet energy, of course, Eris always enhances anything it touches. And it brings it to a soul level, because it is all about depth, depth of the psyche, what you really have deep inside you, and what you can act upon without giving in, without surrendering to conditioning or to previous wounding that sometimes inhibits action, or without surrendering to consensus thought, which may not be where you're at. You may be ready to transcend consensus thinking, as all the paradigm shifters in history have done, and many of them have strong Eris. I've been able to demonstrate that in my work. I wrote the book about Eris called The 10th Planet, which has been very well received. And basically identifying as a feminine warrior energy for soul intention. So what is your deepest idea of your life purpose? It's where you're really going, what you really have to contribute, and how you can recognize that. Meanwhile, Haumea and Makemake are new planets also, and not very well understood, but they do refer back to nature. They are named after indigenous gods and goddesses. These are all officially planets, called dwarf planets, but still planets in the Kuiper Belt. And Haumea, which has been fascinating to research, has to do with the profound connection to nature, to natural law, nature's spiritual path. Nature is shape-shifting exemplar of moving forward in a graceful way that's in accord with our surroundings, with the rest of society, with what you might consider right action. In other words, you can't just do anything you want. The example of former President Trump, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it because I'm president now. Well, not entirely true, actually. Which does bring me to the impeachment trial going on. And I don't want to be partisan about this, but I do think it's important to recognize that when we look at the mundane astrology, we can see, again, this right versus left. And we can also see that there's a process of transforming society that has a certain amount of optimistic, forward-looking flavor to it with the new Aquarian placement of Saturn and Jupiter, which were exact on the previous winter solstice on the 21st of December. And so this is a big thing that's playing out. People say, well, we should just move on, forget about it. But, what happened was serious. What happened on January 6th when the mob invaded the Capitol, and how much was Trump responsible? And the question, I'll leave that to the legal machinations, but the question really at its most fundamental level to me is the question of, was the election fair and square, or was there massive fraud at all levels of the government to somehow promote an incorrect result? And all these Republican states across the country have certified their result and said this is what the result was. That there was a recount in Georgia where they said, okay, maybe the machines didn't count the ballots correctly, but we still have all the ballots. Let's hand count the ballots. And they did a hand count. They did 3 counts. The first count when they said Biden won. The second count when they did a hand count because it was within, I think, 0.5%. So they did a hand recount. And then there was a challenge by the Trump administration. They did a third count. All 3, they came out the same. So that's just one state, but you can still see there's not much basis for fraud. There's never been any evidence presented for the fraud. Just to be very factual about this, I'm not being partisan, I'm just being factual. What is the true here? And it's important to recognize that it looks like no evidence has been presented for the fraud. There were 60 court cases that were thrown out for lack of evidence, 60. And nothing enough, maybe something here and there, but nothing enough to change the outcome in any state. And there were several states involved in the election victory. So the answer is no, there was not fraud. This was fair. And, of all the things you can think about what's good about the Democrats or not good about the Democrats, what's good about the Republican conservative attitude, certain things, immigration and so on, or what's not good about it. In spite of all those, everybody is entitled to their opinion. There is a fact here about the validity of the election. And if there's no fraud and there was no reason to suspect fraud, and the person that was in charge of the election in the Trump administration said it was the fairest election in US history, and then he was fired, the question becomes, how did that statement come about where Trump said, well, it was fraud, I really won this election? And really the only answer you can come to when you look at the facts of the matter is that that was a lie. It was simply an attempt to stay in power, not to face criminal charges of one kind or another, etc. And once you recognize that, then everything else follows from that. No, that wasn't a good idea for a president to make a bold lie statement like that and get people convinced all across this country that there was something wrong with the election. The people that invaded the Capitol thought they were doing the right thing. They thought that there had been fraud, massive fraud, at least many of them, most of them, and that they were trying to correct it. They called themselves patriots. I don't find that so despicable as what was done ahead of that in the 2 months preceding to say that the election was fraudulent and to speak that from the president from the Oval Office. So that made me think. I'd like to look at that chart. So let's look at the chart for the moment. It's the chart of January 6th, and I'm going to look at it in the transits to the US chart. And the reason I wanted to bring this up was for a couple of reasons. And by the way, we have some progressive ideas going forward that we can still make adjustments to this country. I love what Amanda Gorman said in her presidential inauguration poem that she delivered, where she said, "This society is not broken, it's just unfinished." And I think that's the way to look at our lives too. It's there's nothing wrong with what we've done in the past. It's not like we're in a dysfunctional place. It may be somewhat dysfunctional, but that's normal. That's understandable that we have flaws. But what can we do to kind of start to bring that into a different alignment? How can we chip away at that? So when I was looking at this chart, a couple of things came up for me, and let me see if I can gather my thoughts here. One thing that's quite interesting in this chart, the position of Pluto on January 6th was 24 degrees of Capricorn, exactly opposite the Mercury in the US chart. Meanwhile, Mercury was close to Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn, and 27 degrees of Capricorn is actually the position of Pluto in the US chart natally. So we have Pluto opposite Mercury, and we have Mercury in the sky on Pluto, and what we have is a media craziness, right? I mean, the Mercury in the US chart represents the media, and in fact, the moon represents the public. And the moon is also at 27 degrees because that's a natural semi-sextile in the natal chart of the United States from 1776, July 4th, 1776, that they both occupy 27 degrees of successive signs. So that's an interesting thing about this country. You can look at it that way. And the fact that in the moon's sign of Cancer, we have the media, we have Mercury, which represents the media, and we have Pluto opposite at this timing. And of course, it was a very dark time for the country. Many people have said the worst day in the history of the United States or something like that, one of the worst days. And the Capitol invaded, and Congress people having to hide and fear for their life. chants of hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. Anyway, that was all recorded. So it was all out there in the open, all this video, and they're presenting the video during the impeachment trial. And like I say, it's just to bring to attention how this happened, what was the basis of it, and how was that untruth promulgated, and it was by the announcement of the sitting president, unfortunately. And so I'm interested also in looking at Neptune. Neptune being, it can be deception, it can be truth versus lie. And what do you see in the United States chart with Neptune? But you see it at 22 degrees of Virgo, also being lit up by the position of Eris at 23 degrees, also being lit up by the position in this new moon, which is another chart you can witness here for a minute. Here's the transits from this week of the impeachment trial. This is the transits for February 11th. And so there we have the new moon at 23 degrees of Aquarius. We have the position of Eris at 23 degrees. And if we, in time passage of software, you can do a thing where you say, I'd just like to see a single planet. And the planet we're going to look at is the natal planet within the US chart of Neptune. And here you can see the yacht. So basically what we're looking at here is an inconjunct from the position of Eris, an inconjunct from the new moon to this 22 degree mark. And the opposition is to, a few degrees off, is to Neptune in the sky. So I think this does, oops, sorry about that. I think this does point out that there's a bit of Neptune going on in the US chart right now. And I think that's quite interesting when we consider that, during the invasion of the US Capitol on the 6th of January, and I timed it for 1:00 p.m., which incidentally was also when the local time in Washington, D.C., of course. And so this would be EST, as far as the 1 p.m. And the moon at 21 degrees of Libra was making a sextile to Mars in the US chart at 21 degrees. So that's, to me, a little bit interesting also, that Mars representing the military in the country, but also militaristic violence, you could just say violence, that did come up in that way also. So there's probably other things we can see in this chart. I don't want to belabor it and go on and on about it, but to me this is quite interesting, some of the transits that you can see in action. And I think I will leave it at that and not go further with the analysis of this chart. So back to the new moon. So here we have the new moon, and then we will have again the full moon at the end of the month that follows that up. So let's look at that just for a second. So this is the full moon, you could say the fulfillment of this new moon energy, when we will be looking at the end of the month, February 27th, at kind of how that lines up, and we will be having at that time, the sun will be in the next sign of Pisces. So we're looking at 8 degrees Pisces, opposite the moon at 8 degrees Pisces. And the thing I'd like to bring forward about this full moon chart that's coming out toward the end of the month here, a couple of weeks more, is that the position of Maki-Maki, we've been talking about these new planets, we're talking about Haumea, but Maki-Maki at 7 degrees of Libra is very much a part of the full moon of both January 28th and then this February 27th, because there is the position of Uranus at 7 degrees of Taurus, the position of Chiron exactly opposite Maki-Maki at 7 degrees of Aries. And this was partly true. It wasn't at 7 degrees, but I think it's 6 during the January 28th full moon. And then we have the positions of the sun and moon themselves at 8 degrees. And we even have Saturn in this one coming up at 8 degrees. So basically you have Saturn square Uranus. You have at the same degrees, therefore being trine to trine, and it would be an inconjunct from Uranus to the position of Maki-Maki. Now, what is Maki-Maki? It has to do with profound connection to nature as well. but it has a much more activist slant to it. So this is a sign of environmental activism. You see it prominent in the chart of Greta Thunberg, for example. Many times I've seen how this is more of an activist agenda in the same concept of the connection between our civilized or society life and the life of nature around us, which is really the matrix in which we survive, right? And it's very important spiritually. So thinking of this as environmental action is very interesting because we recently had what they called the most important day in the United States as far as legal situations, the most important day for climate change remediation that we've ever had. And it was on the 27th of January, just the day before the preceding full moon that also lit up Maki. So I'm just saying, looking ahead to the end of the month, are we going to see something? We see something every day on climate change. It's really popular right now. All the companies are talking about it. They're saying, hey, we're really green. We're really doing things that will help recycle. And, it's getting to be kind of the more popular. It's important. I mean, we only have 10 years to correct this situation, and at least ameliorate. I mean, there will be rising sea levels no matter what. There will be more extreme climate situations like the storms and also the heat. Just the average temperature every summer has been higher or close to the hottest summers on record in the past 8 years have been like the 7 hottest summers on record or something like that. So I'm looking to see whether there will be, this is even more of a punch with Maki coming up at the end of this month. So to me, it will be very interesting to see whether there's any kind of significant climate change issues that come about then. I mean, the administration, the new Biden administration is working on climate change, and we'll see if something that they're doing has some kind of connection with, again, the end of this next month, as it did at the end of the past month. So that's one thing I wanted to show you about this full moon that's coming up, when it will be Pisces Virgo. And we'll talk about that more as it gets closer. So back to the new moon chart. And once again, thinking of it as what we're all dealing with. And it's just important to recognize that we're in the midst of transformation as a society, as individuals. Everything that we do counts. In this pandemic, each individual action is so important, which, again, there's prominent Eris in the configuration with Pluto, and it was with Saturn-Pluto all last year. And that is standing up for yourself, finding out what it is your principles dictate, and taking action along those lines. And if you can do that, that gets you out of this kind of feeling of helplessness, like you're just a pawn in the bigger factors, the bigger forces that are moving through, because you can take a stand. You can make your statement. You can say, this is what I believe. This is where I stand. This is what I am, being counted as. And it makes a difference. Everybody makes a difference. And especially, as I say, in the pandemic, where each person has to do the social distancing and the mask wearing and washing the hands to keep the infection down, and more important than ever before, because of these new variants that are coming along too, that are going to be more infectious. So, I mean, it's just up to all of us to stay the course, keep the society floating, try to keep people out of the hospitals, the older people, or whoever might be hospitalized as a result, and just keep the faith. The universe is on our side, essentially. So let me transit back to the other view, and we're going to wind up. I think that was pretty short and sweet, but that's what I wanted to say about this new moon. And thank you very much for listening. We do have the time passages software, like I was demonstrating, which we think is a great way to, find out more about your own astrology, about other people's, and be able to figure out how things lining up, because we have good interpretations in there. And don't want to make a plug. I just want to say, best of luck with what we're dealing with all of us. We're going through this difficult time, of 2020 and 2021, and It's definitely the light at the end of the tunnel is starting to show. And it doesn't mean that we can relax as much as we might be tempted. It means that we have to be firm in our resolve to stay the course, to try to heal the society, to try to listen to other people's point of view and honor everybody's point of view, and just come together as a society and beat this pandemic like we haven't been so successful with. And, get the vaccinations out there, which is necessary also. The scientists say that the vaccinations are safe enough so that we can trust it, and we can, in that way, that's the only way to get the pandemic under control, to reduce the spread. So it's what we have, and we can just make the best of it. All right. So best of luck with all of that, and see you next time. So long.